Thank you for viewing this innovation vlog brought to you by the Prosecutors Center for Excellence. My name is Sophia Roach, and I'm joined by District Attorney Vern Pearson from El Dorado County, California, and Linda Ford, the Deputy Director of Legal Training for the District Attorney's Office of New York County. They are both here to introduce prosecutors to the concept of science-based interviewing. But before we get started, I want to hear a little bit about each of your jurisdictions. DA Pearson, can you tell us about El Dorado County?
Sure. El Dorado County is a mostly rural county that borders Sacramento and goes up to South Lake Tahoe and includes South Lake Tahoe within it. We have about 25 lawyers within our office. I would say if you're looking at composition of the county, it would lean more conservative than most counties. And that's pretty much the overview of it.
How many prosecutors does your office employ?
25.
25. And Deputy Director Ford, can you tell us a little bit about your jurisdiction? We're going to go all the way across the country, and we're going to cross a couple of spectrums as we go over.
Sure. So we are East Coast. New York County is one of the 5 boroughs of New York City. So we are the county of Manhattan. We have about 500 prosecutors, about 1,000 professional non-legal staff. Our residential population is 1.6 million approximately, but during the day we swell to about 4 million with commuters and tourists and visitors. So we're an urban population, and I would say that we lean more liberal than, say, for example, El Dorado County.
And so tell us a little bit about what has brought you together, this topic of science-based interviewing. DA Pearson, give us some idea of its origin and the need for it in this profession.
Well, I would say that my particular interest in it, I've been a prosecutor for 30 years, and several years back, I was approached by the Innocence Project about a case that had been tried and a person convicted here in El Dorado County before I was DA. The girlfriend of the person who was convicted was interviewed using a very prevalent interview technique that some would characterize as or call the Reid technique, which is a confession-driven, somewhat psychologically coercive interview technique. She eventually admitted to being involved in participating in a murder. And over time, using DNA evidence and genetic genealogy, we were able to unwind that case and identify the fact that it was a false conviction, that the person who had served about 14 years in prison had in fact nothing to do with the murder. And we've subsequently prosecuted and convicted the actual murderer. So that caused me to be increasingly interested in the fact of the way we're training detectives over the last several years. And it really, over the last 60 years, about 500,000 detectives nationwide have been trained on this interviewing technique that really originated in Illinois. And if you look at the research on it, so many of the false convictions that have occurred, false confessions leading to wrongful convictions, have occurred in Illinois, but all throughout the United States, as well as here in El Dorado County.
Oh. It's fair to say you've gotten a pretty significant amount of attention for your use of this program. Linda, can you tell us a little bit about how it works?
Sure. So the science-based interviewing is at its core a rapport-based methodology where we are not seeking a confession, we are seeking verifiable details. And so if the person is being deceptive, we will be able to determine that by comparing the statement to other known information and evidence. If the person is being truthful, then we can corroborate that by other evidence. The methodology relies upon scientific research, our knowledge of human behavior, about how the brain works, about how memory works, and there are a number of different models, such as the planning boards, motivational interviewing, the interpersonal behavior wheels, and we teach these models during the course. We do a lot of video analysis, we do a lot of role playing, mock interviewing, and so everybody has a chance to learn the science behind why the methodology works, but also to practice it and to engage in a very experiential type of learning so that it really sticks.
How long is the course?
Well, there's a number of different ways to teach the course, whether it's live in person or hybrid. The basic course that we just ran in my jurisdiction was 1 week long, so it was approximately 40 hours. When I first became involved with science-based interviewing, I was working with the NYPD Intelligence Division. When District Attorney Alvin Bragg took office in January of this year, I talked to him about the work that we have been doing, and he immediately saw the benefit of it. And so we have now started training our prosecutors in this methodology as well.
And DA Pearson, you've been involved in training prosecutors and law enforcement throughout California and the nation. Tell us a little bit about how your program differs with being a smaller jurisdiction and any funding opportunities that might exist.
Sure. Now in California, training is for law enforcement is really overseen by an organization called POST, Peace Officer Standards and Training, which many states have a similar type of methodology. And POST regulates and puts out curriculum for training. So over the last couple of years, I've worked with POST to change the way we're going to train detectives, particularly starting with new detectives. They go through an 80-hour course, detective course, which includes interview and interrogation. And they will, as part of that course, be trained in this new methodology effective July 1st of 2023. And here in California, the legislature has banned that confession-seeking type of an approach using deception, things like that, as it relates to juveniles. But our expectation is that's going to transfer over to all cases. And the truth of it is, as Linda was alluding to, this rapport-based methodology that we're teaching, it essentially comes from research that was done by an organization known as the HIG, the High Value Detainee Interrogation Group. And what they did in the aftermath of the 9/11, post 9/11 enhanced interrogation debacle was that they commissioned some researchers to watch thousands of hours of actual interviews of convicted terrorists, of murderers, of other types of offenders, and watch for what works. And what they found works is this type of methodology. And so that's what we're teaching. And I should say, coincidentally, what they found was this aggressive confession-seeking methodology actually doesn't work. So we've been training that to both prosecutors, as you indicated, as well as to investigators. And it's important to note, one of the people, probably one of the best known interviews that people in this space have seen over the last several years is an interview done up in Canada by a person by the name of Jim Smythe. So one of the things in working with him is that he notes that there is this prevalent interviewing technique that we're talking about is confession driven, and detectives are actually trained not to let the person lie. So when the subject repeatedly tries to lie, they will interrupt them and try to shift them back to the truth. And as any career prosecutor who's done a lot of trials, Linda would agree with me, I'm sure, we like the lie. We like the lie to be as detailed as it can possibly be. And we would encourage detectives to do that. But there's been this disconnect when we sit down and talk to detectives and put prosecutors in the same room and you say, well, we don't want them to lie. And our response is, why? I mean, we want the lie. The more detailed the lie, the better, as far as we're concerned.
Linda, can you elaborate a little bit on this? What have you seen in your practice in terms of the value of confirming either true or false information from somebody who's been subjected to one of these interviews?
Sure. I mean, before I became Deputy Director of Legal Training Unit, I was in the trial division for 34 years. And for the past 26 years was investigating and prosecuting murder cases in Manhattan. And I agree with Vern that a false exculpatory statement from a defendant is often more valuable than a sort of classic confession, because with the false exculpatory statement, you can show to the jury through other evidence why this statement cannot be true or is not true. It also will limit the defenses. So if a defendant, if a suspect claims misidentification in his false exculpatory statement, then it makes it very, very difficult for the defense to shift to justification or some other defense at trial. In my practice, the greatest value, the greatest impact that science-based interviewing had on my work was in gaining the cooperation of witnesses who would be considered less than cooperative in other situations. So the victims of gang violence, non-fatal shooting victims, people who may be involved in criminal activity themselves, who are not incentivized to participate in the criminal justice system, people who are legitimately afraid to cooperate with us. Using the motivational interviewing model and the orbit model and the active listening skills that we teach in science-based interviewing has allowed me to engage with those witnesses in a manner that maximizes the possibility that they will be cooperative, and they will be voluntarily cooperative and motivated to come to court and to assist in the prosecution of the case.
So I think many of us are familiar with the term motivational interviewing, maybe from other disciplines, but this concept of orbit, is that an acronym, or is that, describe it for us?
Sure, that's the interpersonal behavior wheel, and it does have its origin in psychology. You take a look at competitive versus cooperation scale and the power, either high power or low power scale. And we spend a lot of time about analyzing the relationship between the interviewer and the interviewee, where each of them are on those scales, how that impacts the interview, and how you can keep both yourself and the person you're interviewing on the good wheel, as we call it, the adaptive wheel as opposed to the maladaptive wheel. We do a lot of video analysis where we look at interviews and we analyze, where is the interviewer on these behavior wheels? Where is the interviewee? How is that impacting the way the interview is going and the level of cooperation and engagement that the witness is having? How can we change our behavior in order to maximize the opportunities to engage with the witness?
And DA Pearson, what would you say are some of the most significant outcomes as a result of seeing both a law enforcement and a prosecutorial shift to this style of engaging witnesses and victims?
Well, probably the best way I could put it is to say it works. This type of an approach is actually more effective than what detectives have been trained over the last 60 years. Sure, there was a lot of confessions that have been obtained by detectives trained in some of these confession-driven ones, but part of the problem here is we don't know if they would have confessed anyways. In other words, there's really three types of people that get interviewed. There are people who are never going to talk about anything related to what it is that they're being investigated relative to. They're just never going to say anything. Then there's people who, they could be interviewed by essentially a potted plant, and they're going to tell their whole story because they're wanting to tell the story. And then there's the people in the middle. And what we have seen is that the people in the middle, the people who might talk, are far more likely to begin talking, provide verifiable information, and sometimes the information exonerates them, and sometimes it does not, depending on the circumstances. And so it's a much more effective way of training officers, training prosecutors to obtain information.
And while it sounds like acquisition of this information is maybe a little bit more complex than some other training that prosecutors may get, it almost sounds like it's become intuitive for you and for other practitioners once you kind of get the basics.
I think that's a very on point observation, because my prosecutors that have been trained on it, and as well as some from other jurisdictions, one of the things they go into the class thinking this is a class about how detectives should do interviews. And instead, what they find is all sorts of things that they can use as the prosecutor themselves. In other words, way they can talk to witnesses, as Linda was alluding to. You know, one of the things that weakness that we have in basic training for prosecutors as well as for officers is just basic good listening skills, how to ask open-ended questions, how to use effective silence, minimal encouragers where you basically say, please go on, things like that. Echoing reflections where you say, I hear you saying that you were not at the bar where the bomb went off. Can you tell me where you were? And using that type of stuff in terms of those types of approaches are effective regardless of the setting that they're being used in.
Anything else that either one of you would like to add in terms of implementing this in a prosecution office?
Well, I think we always need to talk about funding. I would recommend, if you're going to your county or your state directly for funding, that you arm yourself with statistics about any payouts for any legal settlements for wrongful convictions, because this training will pay for itself if you put it into that context. If you are looking for grant money, it is such a broad-based methodology that enhances communication with witnesses, suspects, victims, informants, potential informants, community members. So really, you know, a wide variety of grants could be applicable, whether it's violent crime, special victims, human trafficking, sex crimes cases, community engagement, procedural justice. You know, it will all fit very nicely. And thirdly, I would recommend collaborating with other jurisdictions the way El Dorado has been collaborating with a number of different jurisdictions in California, as well as with New York County.
And who should people contact if they're interested in more information about this?
Well, either one of us. I mean, I think that probably both of us are in. We first met in New York at an NYPD training about 3 years ago. Before COVID, and either one of us, I think, would be good. And I will say, I'll add in, is that in May of this, I think May 8th, the week of May 8th, we're going to have a more advanced training as part of a week, and then essentially a research symposium. So we'll spend between a day and a half and 2 days presenting some of the research that's out there, and encouraging prosecutors and law enforcement executives and others that are interested to come to that.
Well, I want to thank you both for sharing this innovation, and thank you to our viewers. If you would like to share an innovation with us, please contact PCE directly at contactpce@pceinc.org. Thank you to you both for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.